Right now, people in New York City are protesting because they're being locked out of their jobs, locked out of places to eat, locked out of the ability to travel. And now, ultimately, they're protesting because being locked out is abusive. It's a form of punishment. How many of you have followed the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie case? How many of you are aware that before Gabby Petito was killed, she was locked out of her own van by Brian? Why? It's a form of punishment. But a punishment for what? It's a punishment because of a failure to comply, a failure to unify. Now, don't be fooled by the sound of unification. I know it has a nice ring to it, but the truth is that at the core of unification is narcissistic abuse. I want to let you know that I am here for your healing journey. Those of you who are in a toxic relationship right now, I do offer services down below in the description box. You'll find access to my calendar where you can schedule some one-on-one time with me. Now, many of us on a micro level have experienced the pain and the anguish and the torture and the torment of being involved in a relationship, maybe a family relationship or an intimate relationship, where we saw this attack on our character, an attack because of our individuality. Now, how many of you know now that narcissistic abuse operates on them being in control, robbing you of your freedom, robbing you of your individuality, calling it unification, and calling you selfish for having your own thoughts, your own ideas, and your own way of seeing things? And it's very painful. And as a result, many of you have had to leave these toxic relationships. Many of you have had to leave your parents, leave your family. Some of you are stuck trying to do this right now. If that's you, listen, I want to encourage you to keep walking because unification is not possible. Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And I will separate families. I will divide and separate mothers from daughter, father from son, brothers from sisters. And we don't like to hear that, and we often wonder why. I'm going to share with you why, also using Jesus as an example. We need to understand this. Why was Jesus killed? Why was Jesus hung on the cross? A lot of people, especially Christians, will say, well, because it was a sacrifice and Jesus needed to do. Yes, that is true. It was a sacrifice. But what also was it? It was to show us what it looks like when someone doesn't conform. When somebody says, stand up and look at what unification really is. Unification only works at the cost of freedom. Jesus represented freedom. Jesus represented pulling people out from the ideas of the rules of how things ought to be done. That is what Jesus did. That's what he stood for. And while he was doing it, without saying a word, he was spitting in the face of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Yes, people want to say Jesus was hit and he was punched physically, but that's because in the mind war, the war for people's minds, Jesus was spitting in the face of the local government. This is why he was crucified. This is why he was beat. This is important for us to understand. The two things. Jesus said, I will divide families. Jesus showing us that he was crucified and killed because of him standing against the unification. You and I need to take something from this. Listen, the reason you are divided from your family members, the reason your eyes are open now to the reality that you cannot be involved intimately with certain people is because you now have this understanding that you can't be an individual. You can't have the freedom when you are around people who want unification. When you're around people who say, no, you have to be like us. If you are different from us, then you will be punished. And this is where we get narcissistic abuse. Narcissistic abuse is, in fact, a result. It's a punishment for failing to be controlled. I'm going to say this again. Narcissistic abuse in your life is a punishment for failing to be controlled. By failing to be controlled, by failing to do what somebody else or other people or what a family tells you to do, the result of that is punishment, locking you out, for example. And that's just the beginning. For those of you who have followed the Gabby Petito, Brian Laundrie case, You know that locking Gabby Petito out of the van was part of the punishment. Why did Gabby Petito receive that punishment? She tells the police officers in the body cam footage. So does Brian. Brian says, she was kind of doing her own thing and she needed to calm down, so I locked her out. Made it sound nice, but the reality is, if you can dig deeper into what's being said, she's not doing what I'm telling her to do. So I had to lock her out. I had to get her to comply. I had to get her to conform. I had to get her to understand that we need to unify as a couple, which means she needs to do what I tell her to do, which means I've got to lock her out. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that the authorities of certain states and cities are like Brian Laundrie, but I think you can just kind of put those pieces together. We need to punish people because they're not listening to us. We want unification and they want to do their own thing, so we're just going to lock them out. We're going to lock them out of their jobs. We're going to lock them out of places to eat. We're going to lock them out. It's punishment. The sad reality is what's the next step? What was the next step for Gabby Petito? Right? But the news in this is that we don't have to comply. Gabby Petito did not have to comply with Brian Laundrie. Gabby Petito also didn't have to go back into the situation where ultimately it cost her her life. So as people, we need to understand that we don't have to comply. We do not have to unify. But we need to know our distance. We need to know our space. We need to be able to operate and live detached and separate. Now, don't get me wrong. There's certain rules that we all have to follow. Most of those rules are just called being decent human beings, right? We need to be decent. But we need to also understand that we are at war. And it's a war of the mind. It's a war of compliancy, which equals unification, versus individuality. And unfortunately, unification can never exist without the cost of people's freedom. So if you like your freedom in this life, then you need to stand firm on what freedom means to you. If you like your freedom from toxic relationships, from narcissistic parents, people, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, then you need to step away from these relationships and stand firm, say, no, I am an individual. I'm not going to be in a relationship with you. I don't care if you're my mom, my dad, brothers or sisters. I'm not going to comply with you. I'm not going to become unified with you because your unification cost me my freedoms. This is what we're experiencing on a micro level, but we're also experiencing the same thing on a national level, on a global level. Yes, people, we are at war. There will be no unification. I'm going to share with you one more parable Jesus said, to the parable that Jesus gave, and it was this. A farmer went out, sowed good seed, and up sprang wheat. And then an evil one crept in and sowed in weeds. And the servants of the farmer said, hey, let us go pull the weeds right now. And the farmer said, no, let them grow together. And then at the time of harvest, we'll separate them. Listen, I understand this parable now because for the longest time, we've all been enmeshed with narcissistic people, with all different kinds of ideas. We've been meshed and we've tried to get along. But now we're at a place of division. There can't be unification. What do you have in common with somebody who wants to physically hurt others as a form of punishment? What do you have in common with people who want to lock people out of jobs? What do you have in common with people who want to lock people out of restaurants? How can you be unified with that? Many of you are struggling with this, and I get it. We all are. You see, we are not in a place of unification. We're in a place of division. And the last bit I'd like to offer is that don't worry, don't fret, because God is a God of division. God created darkness and the light, but guess what? He divided them. God is a God of division. Listen, I want to be a part of your healing journey and understanding and processing this. Down below in the description box, you'll find access to my calendar where you can schedule one-on-one time with me. Telephone calls, WhatsApp, FaceTime calls, it's all available for you.